So welcome to Cultivating Wholeness for the connected self you always wanted. I'm your facilitator today, James Prieto, and Kelly Knowles is also helping out today. Thanks so much for being here, Kelly. And just want to say a little bit about, what is wholeness anyway? You know, some people don't even know what that means. And for me, wholeness is living fully from all facets of yourself. And I want to say a little bit about how I discovered this work. So my Uncle Mike from Seattle, I think there was someone from Washington earlier. So he has been instrumental in my reading life. So I have several little stories that I'm not going to tell you today, but he happened to take me to a bookstore in Seattle called Elliott Bay, which is like an amazing bookstore. And this book jumped out at me. This is affectionately called Bob because it's so big, but it's Nature and the Human Soul by Bill Plotkin. And the title just jumped out at me. So of course I caught it and I bought it. And after reading maybe a quarter of it, it sat on a shelf for a while. And it wasn't until, and this was in July 2012, wasn't until I started hearing Bill Plotkin's name from a couple of friends that I really trust. And they were describing it as kind of like a way of returning to nature and incorporating nature into like healing and this thing that Plotkin called wholing, you know, becoming more whole and living from all facets of humanity. And so I ended up going and meeting Bill along with 400 other men in this men's weekend with Father Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan. And I have to say, I really resonated with the work because it sort of like pointed out parts of my own growth journey that were missing. Like I realized that I came from an intellectual, I grew up basically loving math and science, and I lived in my head a lot. And what I realized from Plotkin's work, and especially the work that we're going to look at today, is that he has a 4-directional model, which we'll go over today and kind of explore what each direction means. And I realized that I was spending all of my time in the north. The north is the facet of the self that's thinking. And I was sort of like living in this very narrow scope out of the possibilities that, you know, that life and the human experience provide. And so, in actually seeing, you know, the other directions, the other facets of the self, I realized that I needed to cultivate these other areas. And I have to say that I've been super happy with the results, really loving the journey of actually, you know, diving not only into, you know, the human psyche and my human experience, but also developing a relationship with nature, like a tangible, like these, you know, trees are my friends now, you know, and so that's part of the journey. And along those lines, the other part that I love about, and I by the way, I want to credit Bill Plotkin and Animas Valley for, you know, creating and offering all this work. And that community also reads a lot of poetry. So I'm going to start our session by hopefully inspiring you with a poem by Mary Oliver. And this one's called The Journey. One day, you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late in a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Just want to pause to let those words, I find those words really inspiring. And what I'd like to do now is invite a little bit of connection in our breakout rooms. So I'm going to put you in rooms of 3 to 4 people, and I'd like you to talk about, basically each person will have 1 minute. Why you're here? Why are you here? And just talk amongst yourselves in sharing that, and then we'll come back and harvest a little bit. So sort of like we're going to plant a little garden and see what comes out. So I've got the rooms ready, and we'll see you in 4 to 5 minutes.
So what are we saying? Just introducing ourselves?
Why are you here?
Why are you here? Okay, thank you.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. And I'd love to hear from 2 or 3 people. Just like, why are you here? Just want to bring your sharing space into the larger group. If you'd like to share, raise your hand visually, or you could do the click on the reactions and raise your hand that way. So kind of like that. So who would like to share in the larger space? Like, why are you here? What was it about this particular offering? Grant, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
I'm gonna unmute myself. I am here because I recently read Nonviolent Communication and was frankly blown away by it. That I was telling the group I just left that this year I was a part of 2 book clubs, and they were the first book clubs I've ever been a part of in my life. And one of them read Nonviolent Communication, and I read quite a bit, and almost exclusively nonfiction. And I'm comfortable saying Nonviolent Communication was the most life-changing book I've ever read. And just because of the meaningful experience I had with this book, I began looking up some trainings and saw this one, and the title of this one and the description really captured me. So I signed up for it.
Thank you. Thanks, Grant. I see Eric. Eric, your hand's up. Please unmute yourself. Why are you here?
Hey, yeah, well, as you know, I've been taking some nonviolent communication classes with you, and you had this on your schedule. I looked at it. I thought it sounded intriguing, but a bit strange. And I picked up, I'd never heard of Bill Plotkin. So I picked up one of his, I just looked up which book would be a good start to understand what he's about. And I read Soulcraft. And I found that really powerful. After I got, at first it was just strange. And then the more I got into it, the more it seemed like it could be really useful for me on my journey. So here I am.
Thank you, Eric. And I like to balance out the genders, just the energy, and I want to invite other voices that might identify as female or other or non-binary, just wanting to bring some balance into the space. Yeah, one other voice. Would love to hear from a woman.
I'll share.
Yeah,
Um, hey. Um, yeah, I was kind of introduced to nonviolent communication through a community in West Virginia called Center for New Culture East. And just completely blown away by the embodiment work they do there with, consent culture and like nonviolent communication, and just like, dove into learning more about it, being, poly myself, and, really with long distance partners, and, communication being so important, that, I really leaned into a training course of nonviolent communication, and I'm excited to learn more about self and the different parts of self and Indigenous wisdom. So thank you for holding this.
thank you, C. Thank you so much for speaking up. Yeah, and I've been practicing nonviolent communication for 20 years, and it has meant so much to my life, just upward trajectories. And I do want to share. So basically today I'm just giving you kind of a sample of this 10-week series, a 10-week journey to the connected self you always wanted. And so that information's here. Kelly, if you happen to have the PDF, maybe share it with the group. So today's workshop is essentially NVC meets Wild Mind. So we're going to be working in both modalities, using NVC is kind of a foundational framework, and we'll see that it fits mostly into the North sphere, NVC by itself, and yeah, just here's a little bit about me. I said before, NVC has been in part of my life for about 20 years now, and I found that this wild mind work has allowed me to even go further. So I love this picture because it's a beautiful metaphor of where we spend most of our time. So if you think of our lives and how we show up in the world, I like this metaphor of having the iceberg, and you only see maybe 5% of the iceberg on the top. So this is where most interactions take place, is at the tip of the iceberg. And the idea is that we want to basically leverage all of who we are. And so the stuff underneath the surface of the water, there's like some south energy, some physical attraction and connection, and imagination, and also as we'll see, like the presence of being fully present in the moment. So this stuff below the surface might be uncomfortable for you. So I just want to call that out. And wanting to skip, because we already did this. And we talked about raising the hand, which is down here in the reactions. So it helps me to see that you actually have a question or you want to add something. And we talked about muting yourselves. So NVC, nonviolent communication, is a language of life. And, that's the subtitle of Marshall Rosenberg's book. And it's a way of focusing our attention to create compassionate giving and receiving. So seen through that lens, you know, the work by Plotkin is totally consistent with that, especially because, as we'll see, the practice of like self-empathy, so basically connecting with our own life, is really where, you know, this Wild Heart series is all about, basically tuning into the different facets of wholeness. So one of the problems that can show up in, you know, practicing nonviolent communication without wholeness is it can be experienced as flat or heady, analytical, and, you know, some people complain of it being psychological. So, you know, especially when I started, this totally describes how my NVC practice was showing up in the world. And, you know, it wasn't, I was really wanting connection, but, you know, my NVC practice, you know, being so heady, then it wasn't having the effect that I was wanting. And so, you know, discovering Bill Plotkin, it talks about, you know, bringing, or at least the way I see his work influencing my NVC practices, it allows my conversations to come to life by cultivating wholeness. And so part of what we're going to do is, you know, today we're just covering the facets of wholeness, but each facet also has protective parts that he calls subpersonalities. Like the loyal soldier is one of the subpersonalities of the North, and the wounded child is the subpersonality of the South. And so those are the things that will actually go in deeper through the series itself. And so the goal is to live fully from all facets of the self. And so this particular framework is nature-based. So, you know, his main hypothesis that a lot of our dysfunctions come from a disconnection from nature. So in a way, we're disconnected from ourselves. And the other thing that I love about Plotkin, which is very consistent with Marshall Rosenberg, is that, you know, we have innate resources for self-healing. And both Marshall Rosenberg and Bill Plotkin were psychologists, you know, PhDs. So, and they both got out of the system to connect with life more directly, to basically empower people to get healthy and to connect to life more fully. And so the idea is we want ourselves to be more fully alive, and to also have our connections come alive. So just giving you a little bit of the framework here. So it is an earth-based framework. So, you know, the earth spin creates a magnetic field that help to create these, that actually create the four directions, you know, as we know, as north, south, east, and west. And here's a high-level summary of the four directions. And I love that it leverages metaphorical language, which can help us see how, you know, deeply we are connected to the earth, and also gives us a framework for understanding ourselves and finding ways that we might leverage to become more fully alive. So we start with dawn, with, you know, the sun. The sun is rising. And it's a metaphor for life. You know, when we're born, we come out as innocent. And this is also the place where, you know, after we go through all sides of life, we come to die. But before we die, we have this sage wisdom. So this is the what he calls the innocent sage and the trickster energy. So full, and the window into knowing of the East is full present sensing. And I want to call out also that this work is inspired by, Native Americans also treated the 4 directions as sacred. And Plotkin's model combines, brings in depth psychology from the West and combines it with this nature-based model. So we move, and as the sun comes up and eventually it reaches midday, reaches noon. And this is, when the sun is out, it's the warmest part of the day. And the metaphor is our wild indigenous one is able to come out to play. And the window of knowing there is full-bodied feeling. So bringing in the full body, not just our brains, but the full-bodied experience into life. And this was actually super important to me because I realized that I lived fully in my head. So I had a lot of north energy. And as the cool thing about Plotkin's model is if you're strong in one area, the direction opposite has the most to offer you. So for me, discovering the South and my embodied feeling was the part of me that was really lacking. So I was weak in my South. And so I adopted, practices that helped me to become more fully embodied. As we'll see, the model is helpful in those directions as well. So moving on, and we go from noon to dusk. So this is the time of day when the sun is starting to go down, and we have kind of a veil between 2 worlds, the day world and the night world. And this is a place of mystery, what Plotkin calls the dark muse beloved. And this is the part that where we find creativity, and the window into knowing is deep imagination. And so this is also the place of dreams, of romantic love, and of creativity. Poetry comes out of the West. And it turns out then in Western culture that the South and the West are kind of repressed. And so part of this work is to rediscover, the parts of ourselves that have been, in a way, oppressed by the culture. So you could see this as an expanded pathway to liberation, which is one of the things that that Marshall Rosenberg also, his work strove for. And we go finally to the north, midnight. Everything's fully dark. And this is where the nurturing generative adult has set up systems and processes to take care of the village. And the facet of wholeness of the north is heart-centered thinking. So I want to pause here. I've said a lot of words, and I just want to pause to make sure this is resonating, and to pause for any questions.
James, I see Michelle has a question in the chat.
Okay. And the question is this archetypes or like that? Yes, this can be seen as a kind of archetype, though, as we'll see, it's similar. Archetypes can be associated with each direction. For instance, in the north, one of the archetypes that applies to the north is like king or queen. And so the archetypes can be applied to each of the direction.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you put the visual up while we talk about it?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for throwing that in there. And I love it when we have an interactive session that way. So are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so we have the visual up, and Kelly sent out the PDFs, which are available to you. Any other questions or comments about the 4 directions? Because we're about to go into each one and expand it a little bit further. So this is kind of the outline.
Grant is raising his hand. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah, I had a question. Do the points relate to times in your life? The first one at least seems to, or not. And then a second unrelated question. I think you said that West and South were the 2 that often get overlooked in Western culture. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did say that. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I had to stop sharing because I like to be able to see who I'm talking to. And at least with my system, I can't do that. So the 4 directions are seen, can also, so that metaphor can be extended into a lifelong, like, stages of development. And that's actually a different book. That's so the stages of development is that first book that I mentioned before, Nature in the Human Soul. So he takes basically extends that model into, we start out as children, and there's different phases of adolescence, and then that transition from adolescence into adulthood is kind of the big one. And he makes the point that most of our people in our society are still living in the adolescent egocentric stages. And that's why we're destroying the planet. So thank you for your question. Raf, I see that your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's just a thought. I wonder if going deep into the 4 areas, it's like trying to notice and meeting needs that we might not be aware of. Thinking the connections with MVC, as we developing the needs of vocabulary, and some of them might not even be aware of. I just wonder.
That is also a way of looking at it. And I found that the different facets of the self help us to develop more of our human experience and to meet more needs, but it comes from a different angle. It's sort of like, it comes from an embodied experience. And I guess there is a little north intellectual understanding as well, but it does relate to needs, and that's actually exactly where we're going now. So is to talk about what needs are, like highlighted by each quadrant. All right, not seeing any more questions. This is probably a good time to transition to the next section. So let's do that.